Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Raising Healthy Mothers. Today, I am excited to welcome Kimberly Espinel onto the show. I think it's no exaggeration to say Kimberly is one of the most influential food content creators on Instagram in the UK, if not the world. And she has built an incredible business from it, going off in tangents that I'm sure you didn't even appreciate could be possible, Kimberly, when you started. So I really wanted to talk about her experience in building this business out of this content that she created on Instagram and how that fits into family life because she has a lot of experience in doing that. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about our chat today.
Me too. So I gave you a really brief intro, but let us know, where did this all start? How did this
hmm
start, and and what you've done with it?
Yes. So I was an adoption social worker for almost 15 years, 13 years to be exact. I loved my job. I loved what I did. And then I fell pregnant and I thought I would have my baby and then everything was going to go back to how it was before. But the moment he was born, I was just obsessed with him and the idea of going back to work full time. I mean, my entire maternity leave was a preoccupation about the fact that I didn't want to do
Mm.
that. I did go back part-time after 16 months. I went back part-time and, it wasn't for me. I never judge moms who go back full-time. I love it. That's amazing, but it wasn't right for me. So I really thought about what can I do to make to still use my brain as it were because I also knew I wasn't built for being a full-time mama at home the whole time. That also wasn't me. It was somewhere in between. It was like, what can I do? And what seemed the most reasonable and the best thing to do was to work for myself because I felt I could then choose my hours, choose my days, fit everything around his needs, his schedule, that kind of thing. I wouldn't have to ask for permission to go on holiday or to go to a school play, all those kind of things. I just felt I didn't want to ask anybody. So working for myself seemed the best thing to do. And I was like, what are the things that I'm passionate about? What do I love? And food was kind of high on the agenda. And so after some back and forth, I decided to retrain as a nutritional therapist, which is how we kind of met through, I did it at CNM, which is quite a well-known nutritional, educational facility in London. And they've got a couple of schools around the world, actually. And I was like, okay, I'm going to study, I'm going to invest a lot of money into this course. And then when I graduate, what's going to happen? Like, how are clients going to find me? How, what? The idea was good, but like, what was the execution? How was I going to bring this to life? And so at the time, Instagram was still kind of emerging. And somebody actually at CNN was like, "Hey, have you seen this thing? It's called Instagram. It's wild. It's rad. You should do it." So I was like, okay, you know what? Let me start a blog. Let me start an Instagram so that by the time I graduate in 3 years' time, I'll have amassed some sort of audience. I'll have visitors to my blog who want to hire me as a nutritional therapist. And then what I did is, obviously I needed to create photos to go with the recipes that I was sharing. And I wanted those to look delicious and they look terrible. So I did like a deep dive and taught myself food photography. And in the process, found food photography and that became my calling, so to say. So I, really, as you mentioned in the beginning, kind of pivoted from wanting to be a nutritional therapist to then finding my feet as a food photographer, a food influencer, and that became my thing. And it meant that, I could work around his needs when he had a nap or when he was at the childminder or whatever it is, I could build this business. And that's kind of how it all came to be, so to say.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I remember, I don't know if you do, but I remember the business lecture we had at CNM, and it was like basically they said if you're not practicing within a year, you've not made it, you'll never make it. And I was like, oh my goodness. And you're so right. You come out of college, you have this incredible knowledge, and you know
Mm,
how impactful the knowledge you have
yes.
is, but the actual implementation of creating
Yes.
business, finding clients is really difficult.
I think that's the thing that it's a whole setting up a business is a whole skill set that is separate from being a good nutritional therapist or being a good creative or being a good writer or whatever it is that the thing is that you want to do for a living. Running a business and being good at that has little to do with how good you are at writing, nutritional therapy, food photography. It's really an entity in and of itself. And the fact that we only had a handful of lectures on that, if I think about all that is involved to actually really make it, marketing and communications and sales and budgeting and, all the things, it's hilarious actually. I
Yeah.
do think that's something that people underestimate and it's not explained, as well as it perhaps could have been, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you mentioned that you were studying at CNM, and at the
Hmm.
time, your son, how old was he, and how did that fit in?
Yes, he was around 3. He was around 3. And to be honest, what I was doing is I was studying at CNM part-time. I was working part-time. And of course, I was his mama as well,
Full time.
So exactly, exactly. He was at the childminder for the days where I was at my work, at my desk job, which was 2.5 days a week. And then I did my studies on the weekends because I have a husband, a partner. So, my son would be with him, so that's how we did it. And then I would study in the evenings, or I would work, about that time on my blog in the evenings after he'd gone to bed.
Wow.
So it was very intense. I don't want to paint it as this kind of, rose tinted experience and rainbows and unicorns. It was a lot of hard work, but I just felt like I knew that what was going to come at the end of that was so much better than leaving him in the way that I was,
Mm.
that it was worth that kind of hustle, I guess.
Mm, mm. And how long was it before you actually left your job to kind of focus on the Instagram or the food
Yes.
photography?
So for me, I think everybody's different, right? And I have a very low risk tolerance, shall
Mm,
we say. So I did my full-time job and the building of my business on Instagram simultaneously. And it wasn't until I started to earn almost as much as I was earning with my full-time job that I felt able to let that go, that safety net of my job, letting that go was once so I would say it was 3, yeah, he was just as he would have been maybe 4.5 when I really just was doing Instagram as my main thing, and all that, the clients that came with that.
mm.
So yeah, I about a year and a half was an overlap of all the things. And then I let my full-time job go, and the rest is history.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's really interesting as well that you said at the start that, you know, some mums go back to work full time, some
Hmm.
mums, might stay at home and be perfectly fulfilled, and you were kind of somewhere in between. And
Yeah.
I think that is so, I think that's very recognizable and relatable. I remember talking to someone before I had kids, and she had maybe a 2-year old, and she said, oh, I went back to work sooner than I actually planned because I realized like staying at home with my kids was not for me. And
Hmm.
obviously, at that point, I didn't have kids and I was full of judgment. But
Hmm.
in hindsight, I completely see that. Like, I completely see the need to not to the need to be yourself and to use your brain in a way that isn't about motherhood and yeah, I guess I sort of relate to that wanting to be in somewhere in the middle of having a job that is completely separate, that is just me, that fulfills me, but also that flexibility to be there, as you said, for the school plays, for the parents consults, and all of those
Yes.
things that people easily miss out on and don't want to, but just don't have that freedom in a
And I,
job.
I also think for me, there's an added dimension that maybe some listeners can relate to as well, is that, as you can tell from my accent, I'm not from the UK. So we don't have family here either. And a lot of my friends didn't have children at the time that I had
Mm,
children. So it was a very as much as I loved being with my son, it's also quite a lonely experience. If it isn't for the NCT group or the sing and sign or whatever it is that you're doing, there's a large periods of the day where it's you, your child, and your thoughts. And that's pretty much it. And for somebody who loves chit-chatting, I have a podcast just like you, like I love chit-chat. I love, interacting with other human beings, talking politics, talking all sorts of things. And there I was all by myself for
Mm,
hours in the day. And I was just like, this is also not right. Whereas, if you think back, that's not how it would have been, say, 100 or 200 years ago. You would have been in a village with your family, with your aunties, with your cousins, with everyone around you in community. And, in a big city, and as somebody who has family abroad, that wasn't available. So I think there's that other dimension as well. It wasn't just about having kind of stimulating work experiences, but it was also about another level of human connection that you get
mm,
at work
mm.
that you don't always get when you're full-time mama at home. So yeah, I think that came into play for me too.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that. And I mean, I harp on about the village and the tribe and how, yeah, we're never meant to do this alone. And sometimes, kind of connecting on social media is actually a great
Hmm.
way to find meaningful connections.
Yes.
So yeah. So let's talk then about how that Instagram account that started off with how can I make my food look beautiful? How
Hmm.
did that evolve into what it has become now? And what has it become?
Yes. So what I will say from the outset is that I never started Instagram with the idea of it being a fun thing. So I never started my Instagram with that. I always started it with, I'm going to do this because my long-term vision is to work for myself. So I started it with through looking at it through that lens, so to say. So I mean, it was the wild, wild west of social media at the time. Nobody quite knew what they were doing. But I posted, so I would take photos and share recipes around twice a week. I would share a recipe on my blog, share those recipes also on Instagram, and then more photos. And just, it was really interesting. People started finding me because I posted mainly plant-based recipes. So that was at the time, Deliciously Ella was just coming to be. And it was a really revolution around plant-based living. So it was me being in the right place at the right time as well. And people finding me. And then eventually brands started approaching me and saying, we love what you're doing. Would you develop a recipe for us? We will pay you X amount of money. And then you can post it on your blog, post it on your Instagram. And it really evolved from there. So that was one strand of my business, was doing what we now call influencer work. We didn't have a term for it back then. And the second strand came very unexpectedly, but as I was saying, I was falling in love with like with photography and food photography and just teaching myself. And then one day, this woman, her name was Anna from Spain. She contacted me and she said, "Listen, I live in Spain. I love your work. I'm going to be in London for a weekend, and I was wondering if you can teach me how to photograph food. Like, I want to photograph the way that you do." And I was like, "What? This is weird." Okay. And so she came and then I taught her and then I posted about it on my Instagram and somebody saw it and they're like, if you teach her, will you teach me? And so that's how this whole other, strand of my business, which is now the biggest part of my business. I teach food photography mainly in online courses, and now also reel creation, all those things I teach as online courses and workshops. It's the biggest part of my business. How that second part came about. So it wasn't something that I had thought of. It was something that somebody found me and then the last part was again, I didn't know this existed. I mean, I knew, but I never thought it could happen to me, so to say, was I then got people approaching me and saying, I'm doing a cookbook. Will you food style it? Or I want to write a cookbook. Will you photograph it? So I had publishers coming to me, or I have a website. I need photos of my products. Will you shoot it? And that's how that third part of my business came to be, where I do food styling and food photography for brands, website, cookbooks, and so on. So it wasn't anything that I went out looking for. It all kind of found me, so to say. So, but I would also say I would have said no if it was something I didn't like, but these were things that were coming my way that I was excited about, that I was intrigued about, that I felt was worth exploring. And I'm so glad that I did, you know. And now finally what I do also is I do mentorship for mainly women, I would say, who want to start creative businesses and just want to figure out the business side of things. Again, that kind of came because people ask me like, how did you do it? Like how come you're running a six-figure business? Like how does that happen? And so that's how that came to be. So it all was very organic and natural and um so yeah, I hope that answers your question. Very long-winded answer.
Yeah, but I think what's so interesting is that you said that you set out, you never set out for it to be a hobby
I
Instagram. It was
never set out.
always with that intention. And I think that is so interesting because, 10 years ago or whatever it was, like everyone was on Instagram just posting, I don't know, pictures of what they were doing and pictures of
Hmm.
what they eat, but it was literally like a snapshot, wasn't it? So to have that vision that actually this could be a really helpful tool, must have been quite ahead of the game.
But remember, I looked at it as a tool to sell or market my what I thought I was going to do, nutritional therapy. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I can use that. It was, but then, I will say, I was following a lot of bloggers and influencers in the United States, and they were already a
Mm,
couple of steps ahead.
mm.
They were getting cookbook deals. They were photographing for brands. So I remember I've told this story, I think once before. I contacted a tea brand here in the UK and I was like, hey, I've got a blog and I love food. And will you send me a couple of boxes of your tea and I will do a blog post? And they're like, absolutely not. They were like, what is wrong with you, woman? And now, and I was going to do it quote unquote for free, exchange for product. And they were like, this is outrageous. Who does she think she is? And now we all understand this concept. I saw my US counterparts do it. I was like, we can do that here. And of course, the UK wasn't quite ready yet for my brazen attempt to get free tea. So yeah, I think just looking at what the US people were doing is what made me see that this is possible. This is where things could head.
Yeah, yeah. No, that is interesting actually to note that what's happening in the US is maybe a few years ahead of what's happening in the UK. Yeah, maybe the UK brands or marketing is a little bit more conservative, so to
Yes.
speak, as a starting point. Yeah, that's interesting. And I love as well, I think what is so interesting about this is that you have so many different arms that has come out of it. I mean, once you were like, oh, okay, food photography is my thing, but actually out of that, you've got these sort of quite distinct offerings and services that you can do and that I guess is very hopeful because like you just never know where it's going to go, right? And you just got to
Yes.
do it.
Yes, but I also think if you're a mama, it means that if you have different strands in your business, depending on the age of your child, their needs, your financial desires, all those kind of things, you can pull different strands. So for example, when I'm photographing a cookbook, that is an 8 to 8 sort of endeavor. If my son were still a toddler or, just entering primary school, it wouldn't have been right to focus on that element and to do things like workshops or online courses. It means that would have had my hands free. He's now a 14-year-old lad who's, doing his own thing. And so if I'm out on a shoot from 8 to 8 or whatever it is, he's quite happy to have the house to himself and nobody nagging him about him being on his phone all the time. You know what I mean? So I just love how depending on where your child's at, what you want financially. If you have different strands to your business, you can tap into one at different times. The same is, for example, during school holidays. So I don't do photo shoots during school holidays. So the summer, I take the whole entire summer off, but my online courses are still for sale and I still make sales for my online courses, but I don't have to be physically there. So what I might do is I might advertise them before the summer so that, Instagram will show it and people will come in, but I won't be there. I don't have to serve them physically. And then when I come back from summer holiday, that's when I can photograph another campaign or cookbook or whatever the case may be, right? So, just having those different parts to your business gives you extra flexibility to work around your needs and your family's needs.
Yeah, and that ultimately is I don't know. Is it the dream? I mean, it's the dream for like small business owners, women business owners, mums, to be able to say, I will take that summer holiday off and still know that I can earn some money even
Yes.
without being physically there. I mean, yeah, because that hustle of trying to find childcare over summer, pull whatever favors you can from friends and family, looking for the summer camps, which ultimately are going to cost you money
Hmm.
anyway. So what
Yeah.
are you doing it all for?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, yeah, it does sound like the ultimate freedom, really. Um,
I would say it does take time to build up to that point. I mean, I'm
yeah,
now, a decade in. So it wasn't like my first year. I was taking the summer off and,
yeah,
money was flooding in. It wasn't like that at all. There was a lot of long late nights. There were a lot of weekends work. I mean, even now we're recording this on a Saturday. It happens
yeah.
still to this day. Without a doubt. So I think there's ebbs and flows, and I would say, especially the first 2 years, maybe, depending, of course, on your business and your vision and the income you want to generate, etc. But the first 2 years of building a business are really hard. They're super hard, and there is a lot of hustle. And I don't want to paint it in such a way that it's not. I guess for me, there's two things that make it different and made it worth my while. One is it was on my terms.
Mm.
It was on my terms. Like I didn't have to do it on the Monday at 9 a.m. when my son had a fever or he wanted to snuggle extra long in bed and just whatever, like it was on my terms. And also there was this vision that if I do X and Y, Z now, I know that when he's 5 and when he's 6 and when he's 7 and really all the way through him going off to university, I can I can be there in the way and show up as I want to. Whereas if I had stayed in my 9 to 5, there was no wriggle room. There was no, it was that was going to be the status quo of
Mm.
coming in at 9 and leaving at 5 forevermore. You know what I mean? So there was like hope, and there was this thing about this is for us, this is for me. And I didn't have that. And finally, because I know my answers are very long-winded, but I also will have to say, I do think it's a little different now because since the pandemic, of course, there's working from home. And I feel that employers are much more flexible than they were a decade ago. But at the time, working from home, those kind of things, that was just non-existent. That wasn't really possible in the way that it is now. So it might be that, working for an employer and working part-time might be better for you at if your child's still very young or and that might be
Mm.
that they need to be of school age for you to start building your business, and that might be a better time for you to hustle and all the things. So yeah, I just wanted to caveat that if that's okay.
Yeah, and I think that's quite an interesting point actually, is to say that pick your time,
Mm,
pick the I guess the scenario, the motherhood that you want, because it is nice and maybe romantic to think, well, if I do it work for myself, I can take the summer holidays off, or I can,
hmm.
I can be there. I mean, I feel like with the mums that I come across, a lot of them do feel this strongly when their children are like under 5, and they're like, but they really need that connection. They need me as a mom, as a parent, and I don't want to be out the house. But then, as you said, like actually, and I feel like I experienced this because my son has now just started school. He's in year 1 now. And it's probably, I do have a younger daughter as well, so it's not completely like free, but it does feel that much more free to know that he's there from 9, for pretty much the whole day. And that gives that clear structure to my day. And I guess, yes, although it's like ultimately we want that more freedom when we are working, our children are very, very young, but actually, I don't really not think about my business. Like, and I think
Hmm.
that's something I really struggle with is I'm not great, and this is probably like something I need to work on really hard is at compartmentalizing. Okay, now they're home, work, I put work aside. I don't look at my phone, I don't look at my computer, I just focus on them. I'm not good at that at all. And I feel that perhaps maybe if you do have that kind of more 9 to 5 structure, that you're more likely to be able to just leave it at the office. But then, I mean, I know a lot of people say that those boundaries are a lot more blurred since working
Yeah.
from home and hybrid
Yeah.
working, and so on. So perhaps I don't know, grass is greener no matter where you are, I suppose.
I think
But
it's
it,
about what's right for you, right? And it's different for everybody. So, but it sounds
yeah,
like you have found something that feels like it's the best version of
yeah.
life work balance for you and your family at this
Yeah.
juncture.
And it's quite interesting actually from like just talking about my experiences. I've always had in mind that I want to take school holidays off, but I also
Hmm.
had in mind that if I wouldn't be able to do it until I felt more established.
Hmm.
But actually, so this was my first, the summer that we've just had was the one between reception and year one. So it was my first one essentially as a school age mum.
Yeah, yeah,
And actually, I did pretty much take the summer off because mentally I needed it. But also, my clients who were also mums
yeah,
were said to me, "Do you know what? I think, can I just take a pause and we'll come back after summer?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I've actually achieved that without actually
yeah,
necessarily
yeah,
expecting
yeah.
to. And as you said, like everything is different for everyone. And depending on the business that you're running, it might be different. I think what's quite interesting is this whole conversation has come up organically because one of my questions was going to be, do you think you can truly get that sort of freedom, that life freedom, that is the sort of holy grail of running your own business and, being a six figure, getting six figures in sort of 3 minutes kind of promise that people sell you. Or is there always going to be an element of hustle when you're running your own business?
I think the reality is it depends a tiny little bit on your goals, the business that you run, all the things, how quick, how many hours a day you're dedicating to your work, etc. But I would say that running your own business always has an element of hustle to it, phases of hustle. So I might have quieter periods, where I'm working on something at the back end of my website. But then when we have a launch, it's really all hands on deck.
Mm,
It's intense. We're doing Instagram lives, and and you come out and you're like, oh my God, it's really, really intense. But I think or we're building a new course, or like there's always something. Um Reels come about and suddenly food photography isn't quite enough, or but I think the beauty is if you pick a business that you love, and as long as it's not 24/7, that you're constantly in this high stress, high hustle mode, it's worth it, I
mm,
think,
mm.
for the end result that you walk away with. As I said earlier already, don't want to paint it as though it's all rainbows and unicorns. It is hard, there is hustle, and I don't think nothing is ever on automation and the sales just flooding in, and I didn't have to do any marketing and it just happened. I've not experienced that in 10 years. There's
Mm.
always effort that comes into but it's worth it. It's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I guess kind of going back to what you said earlier as well is that it's on your terms. It's always on
Hmm.
your terms and you get to say actually this is too much
Yeah.
or I need to put a stop to this. And realizing that that's okay as well. Like I think sometimes as a business owner you can kind of go I can't give up. Like I can't stop. This is everything is depending on this or I'll disappoint people if I do. Um but actually you probably can. You might pivot or you might change direction
Hmm.
or you might take a pause. I mean, that's the other thing is it's perfectly legitimate to pause um, if you need, and it might be what you need to kind of start up again, Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
So what would be your sort of top advice to a mom who's thinking, oh, I want to start a creative business. I don't know where to start. It's all overwhelming. Everyone's telling me to do all these things. What would be your key advice on where to start?
So I would definitely tell them to focus on, well, firstly, obviously, look at, is this the right time? Am I in the right place, etc. But I really would advise them to focus on one platform. So it could be that, like you maybe start a podcast and that's what you focus on, or you decide to run a YouTube channel, or which is what I did, really go all in on Instagram. But I think sometimes people feel they have to be everywhere and do everything. And I think, especially when you're starting out, it's great to have one place where you go and that's where you focus your energy on. You build that up. And then if that's running and you feel good about it, you expand to something else. That would be the first thing. Then the second thing would be I would definitely recommend to make Instagram your number one, just because, and of course, have your website as well, right? But I think it offers everything. It offers obviously video, photography, Instagram stories, live, all the things. But what it allows you to do is to show your personality and show why you are the better coach or why you are the nutritional therapist everybody has to work with or why you're the crochet artist that people need to connect to, right? I think there's something about building a personal brand and having a voice and having an identity and being able to connect with a community. That is something that is very unique, I guess, to Instagram, very powerful, that communication, that connection that you have to your audience that I find no other platform quite captures it as well as Instagram does. So I would start there. I also think it's good to start small, so to say, and maybe not expect yourself to post 6 times a week from the get-go or just see what you can do. If you can post twice a week, amazing. Make it count, be thoughtful. And yeah, that's kind of the starting point I would take is to build an audience to get a really good sense of the pain points they have, what are they communicating, what are they responding to, and also thinking about what makes you unique. Like, why would they buy your ceramic plate or your crochet blanket or whatever it is that you're doing, right? Like, what is it about you um that makes your service or the product you're selling special and communicate that uniqueness through social media posts. That would be my starting point.
Yeah. I mean, it is a very visual platform and it's perfect for creative businesses, like you mentioned. But what would you say to someone like me who has a service-based business and doesn't
Hmm.
obviously have pretty things to photograph?
So I would disagree with you that it used to be a very visual platform. And I think those days are over. I think you can amass 1 million+ followers without understanding how to take pretty photos
Mm.
of whatever the case may be. So, I'm thinking about, I mean, his content is very sleek. I will say that, although I don't think that's why he's had the success he's had. But if you look at somebody like Stephen Bartlett, for example, he's a huge podcaster here in the UK. For anybody who doesn't know who he is, obviously he's also a dragon on Dragon's Den. But if you look at his Instagram, it's really just podcast clips.
Mm.
Essentially, he's not styling a plate or a food or making things look pretty. He does a lot of quotes. They do incredibly well. So I think we need to move away from this idea that to be successful on Instagram, it has to look perfect. It has to be
Mm.
pretty. It doesn't anymore. And that's what's so amazing. It needs to add value. It needs to be relatable. You need to be authentic. Those are qualities that are much more sought after and will allow you to obtain much more success than perfection and pretty things. So I would definitely say the conversation we're having now, just a little snippet of this, for example, on Instagram can work wonders. And also, Tasha, please remind me of the type of service that you provide. It's coaching, right?
Just nutritional therapy. So
Nutritional therapy coaching, yes. So, is there anything specific you specialize in? Like, why would I come to you? Why should I come to you and not to Joe Blogs down the street? Like, what is it about you? I think there's so much that you can share, maybe a personal experience or how your approach to nutritional therapy is different, how informed you are, and also, a lot of your clients will come because they've suffered from whatever, gut dysbiosis for years and the suffering that comes from that. Or maybe they've got mental health issues that's connected to an imbalance in their body, all the things. So, really, yet, and so they're in a very vulnerable place. And why should they trust you? And that's the opportunity that you have on Instagram is to say, you can trust me because I'm friendly, I'm approachable, I'm well studied. This is what I know. You can share tidbits of little things that they can do, 5 steps of improving your gut health this weekend, or I don't know, like there's so much that we can do now that you can do regardless of whether you're doing a service-based business, a creative business, a visual business, it doesn't matter.
yeah. And I guess as well, the way Instagram has evolved has encouraged that more. I guess, relatable and almost like
Yes.
informal content, with
Yes.
stories particularly, but also reels, like reels, especially
Mm-hmm.
now, now that we're not kind of pointing fingers at words dancing across the screen. There is definitely a lot more, I guess, behind the scenes and personality
Mm-hmm.
coming up there, isn't there? I mean, I think some of your reels where you're showing people how to set up for
Mm-hmm.
a great food photograph. I mean, as you said, it's kind of moved on from look at my beautiful plate of food to, something else completely. It's so interesting, and it's because like, and in the early days of Instagram where it was just photos and it was very about perfection and prettiness and so on, I used to look at food, like your kind of food photographs, and think like, I wouldn't even know where to start. And actually having
Mm-hmm.
those like literally like 30-second, 60-second clips of this is how I set it up, this is the lighting I use, is so inspiring because it is a little snapshot into the life of a food photographer and I guess like an influencer on Instagram. So it is, yeah, it's I think remembering that your whole purpose on Instagram is about us. And I love that question actually. Why should you trust me? Like why me? Why?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, is it easier now? Yes and no. It's easier because you don't have to have an expensive DSLR. You don't have to understand even videography techniques to make it on Instagram. But it is harder because you have to show yourself. You have
Mm.
to give your account a voice. You have to be the center of your account, you, the person. And that is it's not for the faint-hearted, you know? It is hard to put yourself out there and be like, "Hey, I'm Kimberly, hire me," or, "I'm a fantastic food photographer, trust me with your money." It is very vulnerable, but it's also very powerful when you can overcome that hurdle of self-consciousness and feeling a little bit like an imposter and really using the platform to market in the most authentic and real way of but why people need to work with you, hire you, follow you, etc.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's lovely. And it is such a nice reminder because ultimately we want to work with people who like us. It's never going to work
Exactly.
if you work with someone who is just there because,
Exactly.
they wanted a quick fix from any
Exactly,
nutritionist.
exactly. But also, so I've just written a book called How to Make Your Food Famous, and it's all about how to essentially make it on Instagram, how to market on Instagram in the most effective way possible. And I interviewed over 40 different influencers, content creators, videographers who have from 100,000 to 2 million followers to really understand how they found success. And this authenticity, relatability, those were consistency, those were themes that were came up so many times in my interviews with them that people will follow them because they feel that their story is like theirs or their food philosophy really resonates or they've overcome an eating disorder and they've been vulnerable about that and shared their journey. And that is one of the most powerful, um, for lack of better words, marketing tool that you have is to show your humanity, to show
Mm,
that you're an expert, but you're also a human being.
yeah,
And that is the power of Instagram right now. That is worth leveraging.
yeah, lovely. Um, Amazing. And that book just sounds, yeah, that sounds incredible. I'll have a look at it as well. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So how else can people learn more about working with you and how to sort of get into your world?
Yes. So the two places I would recommend is to follow me on Instagram, where I am at the Little Plantation. And the second place is my podcast, which is called Eat, Capture, Share. We explore social media marketing techniques. Also, there's a lot of stuff around business and creative business building and those kind of things. And then finally, I do have a little kind of cheat sheet. I will send you the link to maybe include in the show notes where my kind of 15 tools that I would recommend to use to optimize your Instagram. So, yes, that's a freebie that people can download, and yeah, those are the three things I can recommend.
Great. I'll share all of those links in the show notes. Thank you so
Fantastic.
much for coming on, Kimberly. This was such a great conversation. Really interesting to hear your experience of building what it has become. amongst also being a mother.
No, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Take care.
Take care.